This week I was reflecting on, as a Christian, what is my response to everything that's going on right now? Like with the lockdown, the pandemic, and all these trials that people are going through. Because I think as a Christian, we need to have a higher perspective. And when I was reflecting on this, my mind immediately went to Joseph in the Old Testament. Because in my opinion, Joseph serves as a great example of somebody who seemed to have a greater perspective. He seemed to have a positive disposition, even through the trials that he goes through. Because you look at the story of Joseph, which we will in a moment, you'll see that he goes through a lot of highs, and God blesses him, but he goes through a lot of lows. But even through the lows, he has that greater perspective. And I think it's really important as Christians, we have that greater perspective. So I thought it'd be good to look at the story of Joseph today and see what we can learn from him. His story is in Genesis chapter 37. It goes right through to chapter 50, so 13 chapters long, so it's a long story. But let me just summarize the main points here, and then we'll just try and pull out a few things here. So Joseph was the son of Jacob the patriarch. He was one of 12 brothers. And one day when Joseph was young, God gave him a dream, a literal dream. And in this dream, God would elevate him, and all his brothers would bow down to him. Now Joseph goes and tells his brothers this, which as you can imagine didn't go down very well. They already despise him because he was dad's favorite, and now he has the audacity to say to them that he's going to rule over them and they're going to bow down to him. So they hate him for it and they want him gone. So they end up selling him as a slave to Egypt to a man by the name of Potiphar. Now as he served in Potiphar's house, God's favor was upon him, to a point where Potiphar says to Joseph, "You know what, Joseph, I trust you. I entrust everything that I have for you to look after." Okay, so God's favor was upon Joseph, and as a result, the whole household had favor. So everything was good until Potiphar's wife comes into the picture. She tries to make her moves on Joseph. And Joseph, being a man of God, says no. She continues to make the moves. He says no. And out of her humiliation, she sets him up and she accuses him of abusing her and attacking her. And as a result, he gets thrown into prison for that. So now he's doing time for a crime he didn't commit. But God's favor was still upon Joseph. Even in the prison there, he was put in charge of all the other prisoners. And he was also able to interpret people's dreams. He had this ability. God gave him the ability to interpret dreams. Pharaoh hears about this, so he calls Joseph to interpret his dreams. And in that dream, in Egypt, there will be a time of great prosperity for 7 years. Then after that, there'll be a time of famine. And so therefore, Egypt needs to prepare for this. Pharaoh liked what he heard, and in return, he elevated Joseph, or made him ruler over Egypt next to him. And anyway, the famine hits after that time of prosperity. The famine hits, and it was a very severe famine, but it was okay because Joseph had already built storehouses to store the grain in time for the famine. And his job was to sell and distribute the produce to people who needed it. And this is where Joseph's brothers come into the picture, because they travel to Egypt to buy some grain, and they come to Joseph, and they don't know it's Joseph. He knows it's them, but they don't know it's him. And they all bow down to him, like the dream said would happen all those years ago. Anyway, fast forward a number of chapters through the story, a whole bunch of different things happen, but in the end, he reveals his identity to his brothers. He has a heart-to-heart with them. He says, "Don't be distressed that you sold me into slavery all those years ago, because God was behind the whole things. He made all things good." And he shows them mercy. He supplies their needs. And Joseph ends up going and being united again with his father Jacob, who actually thought he died. So it's a pretty good end to the story, and that's basically the storyline. And there are so many things that we can learn about this story. I mean, the first, you can see the picture of Jesus through the story of Jacob. All right, it's incredible how similar they are. All those details, about the robe that was taken off him, and they were both sold for pieces of silver, and people betrayed him, and a whole range of different things. I haven't got time to go into it, but just do a study and look at how this story connects with the redemption story of Christ. It's quite amazing. So we can learn that. We can also learn about God's faithfulness and his favor. We can learn about his sovereignty. the purpose of God, His mercy, His forgiveness. There's a whole range of different things that we can learn from this story. But today I want to focus on the character of Joseph. And in particular, how he dealt with not just the ups, but the downs that he went through. Because as we saw in that story, he went through a lot of ups, but he went through a lot of downs. And yet, through it all, he seemed to display integrity. He was a man of incredible integrity. From start to finish, he didn't seem to waver. He held the line. He did the right thing. He was a man of integrity. Now, some people might argue this point that he always showed integrity. For example, when he was ruler over Egypt, he didn't reveal his identity to his brothers. He kind of strung them along for a while, and it was quite harsh in the way that he spoke to his brothers. Of which I agree, he was quite harsh. But the way I see it, it was kind of like a front. That underneath, he was a man of God, and he really cared for his brothers. In fact, there's part of the story when their brothers turned around, he turned away and he started crying for them and weeping for them so they couldn't see. Right? He had a heart for his brothers, for his family, and a heart for God. He was a man of integrity. And as men and women of God, we need to live with integrity. God expects us to live with integrity, always do the right thing. Yeah? Which, to be honest, is not something that a lot of people seek after these days. A lot of people seek power and prestige and position. A lot of people seek comfort and happiness and those things. But how many seek to be a person of integrity? To be someone that you can trust. To be someone that will do what they say that they would do. Someone who doesn't compromise no matter the cost. Like, that's someone with integrity, and that's the kind of life that God expects us to live. And it's certainly the life that Joseph lived. He was a man of integrity. I want to just highlight 3 displays of integrity that Joseph showed in this story and displayed, and then just work out, see what we can learn from it. The first situation was with Potiphar's wife. He showed integrity there. When she made advances on him, he refused. And Joseph says to her from verse 9 of chapter 39, he says, "My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And then he says in the next chapter that she continues to pursue him and he continues to decline. And this happened over and over again, but he still held the line and did the right thing. He wanted to honor his master. He wanted to honor her and show her dignity by saying no. And he certainly didn't want to sin against God. He was a man of integrity. Now, what he did in refusing her cost him. Even though it was the right thing to do, it cost him, and he ended up being thrown in jail because of this. But this is the thing I love about Joseph from start to finish. He had integrity and he didn't compromise. Refused to compromise no matter what. He could have. He was in a position of influence. He could have compromised, but he didn't. He did the right thing. He honored God. And as believers, we don't compromise. God expects us to always do the right thing. That's living with integrity, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in business and making business deals, or any decision for that matter. We don't compromise, right? We don't cut corners. We don't mislead people. We always tell the truth. We always do the right thing. We always live with integrity. And God's favor is upon people who operate and live with integrity, as God's favor was upon Joseph. And sometimes by doing the right thing and not compromising, people may not understand. You may get rejected, you may get laughed at, you may get persecuted like Joseph was, but at the end of the day, who are we pleasing? Are we pleasing men or are we pleasing God? Because 1 Peter 2:20 says, "If you suffer for doing good and endure it, this is commendable before God." And that's why Joseph had God's favor upon him, not just because he was Jacob's son, but because he was a man that had integrity. The second display of integrity that Joseph displayed was when he forgave his brothers for the evil that they did towards him. Okay, this was no small thing. This was a big thing. He had integrity. Now, they did evil, no doubt about that. They hated him. They wanted to kill him. They ended up selling him as a slave. They got people they convinced others that he was dead. Even their father. So what they did was evil, and they probably shouldn't have got away with what they did, but Joseph showed them mercy. See, when that dream came true and he rose to power, he didn't use his power against them. Instead, he extended his hand of forgiveness. He has integrity. In Genesis 50 verse 20, Joseph says to them, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." In other words, he says, guys, what you did was evil, no doubt, but God is faithful and he brought me to this position where I have the ability to help as many people as possible to save them through this famine. God is faithful. It is all good. See, Joseph had a bigger perspective. He did not let personal offense get in the way of what God wanted to do through him. All right, let me say it again. He did not let personal offense get in the way of what God wanted to do in and through him. That's someone with integrity. And I wonder how many people have missed out on the blessings of God because of personal offense. I wonder how many people have held on to bitterness and anger and resentment and unforgiveness, and it's robbed them of their destiny. Like, we've got to believe that God redeems when bad things happen, when injustices have been done towards us. We've got to believe that God can redeem that. God can take that. He can turn it around for his greater purpose. I mean, isn't that what the cross is about? Isn't it about redemption and making all things new? Taking our sin, God taking our sin and imparting to us his righteousness. If Joseph was here today, I believe he would point to Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. So we would do well to have the same mindset as Joseph, knowing that God is going to work all things together for his greater purpose. And the mindset of Paul, for that matter. God can take the injustices that have happened to us. He can take the bad things. He can take these trials that can be like burdens for us, that can weigh us down, and he can turn it around for his greater purpose if we trust him. So there's no point holding on to unforgiveness or bitterness and stopping God from using you. And maybe some of you, you're holding on to bitterness. Maybe you're holding on to unforgiveness towards somebody. Can I encourage you to do the right thing, have integrity, lay it down, forgive that person, and make yourself a vessel that God can use? Really, really important. The third and final display of integrity, and I'll finish with this, from Joseph in this story, is that he never seemed to complain. You read the story, he never seems to complain. His attitude was amazing. Through all the hardship he faced, and again, as we've seen, he went through hardship, hated by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused of something he didn't do. He went through trials, and yet he doesn't seem to complain. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't. Maybe he did. Maybe there was a season in his life. Maybe he's in prison and he's shaking his fist at God saying, God, what is going on? Remember that dream that you're going to make something of my life, and here I am, a slave? Or here I am in prison? Yeah, or what about Potiphar's wife? I did the right thing. I had integrity there. She made the whole thing up and I'm accused of a crime I didn't do. Where are you, God? What's going on? Maybe he did complain. But if he did, it's certainly not recorded here in the text. And there's no reason not to include it if he did, because the Bible is full of people complaining to God and their stories are told. So why should Joseph be any different? So the way I tend to think of it is that Joseph really wasn't much of a complainer. He didn't seem to have this woe is me mentality. In fact, when you read the story, it almost seems as like everything that happens, he just knew it was part of God's greater purpose. He was somebody who had a greater perspective. That's why this week my mind went to Joseph. I need a bigger perspective. Joseph had a bigger perspective. He sees things from God's perspective. You ever met people like that who seem to have that bigger perspective? Their faith is real. They know that God's on the throne. They're so cool under pressure. I'd like to be cool under pressure. I'd like to live like that. My question is, do you live like that? My question to you is, how do you respond under pressure? There was times where Joseph was under pressure and we know that how he handled it, but how do you handle it? How do you respond under pressure? Because people respond in different ways, don't they? Life is full of highs and lows, obviously more lows than highs of recent times. And as you've heard and seen many people are angry, fed up, depressed, frustrated, and they respond in different ways. Some people have a stiff upper lip, some people grin and bear it, others just complain and get mad all the time, right? People do respond to trials in different ways, but that's them. Let's just put them aside and let's focus on you. How do you respond? Think about it now. When something comes your way, a trial that comes your way, when an injustice comes your way, something you go through that becomes a burden to you, how do you respond? I think as Christians who are seated with Christ in heavenly places, who are born again and born into Christ, we need to have a heavenly perspective. We need to have a greater perspective. Right? So let's just join with Paul, who said, "In all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose." Or join with Joseph, who understood that often what's intended to take us down, God can use to build us up if we trust him. All right, so that's basically the story of Joseph, and hopefully there's a few things there that we can learn. Hopefully it's an encouragement to you.